been 30 years since the winner of a Grand Prix was disqualified for a technical infringement. 30 years ago at the same track, as it so happens. There always has to be a connection with these sort of things. There just is. I don't make the rules. But what happened at the weekend was a race that was one of those where you thought it was going to be between 3 drivers, only for a 4th to announce himself out of nowhere, with a big brain move that, if it had been pulled off correctly, would have turned a 1-5 into a 1-2, only for it to fall short of what the FIA wants from the teams in terms of a legal car. It was like a WWE wrestler cashing in his Money in the Bank contract. And given how qualifying went, I don't think a lot of people expected the winner or the eventual winner to be who they were, because after qualifying, I think a lot of people were saying, oh well, normal service resumed. We already knew Max was going to have to take an engine penalty because he's been going through engine components this season like I go through a pack of Jaffa cakes, but with a fresh engine he banged in a lap that was over half a second faster than Leclerc in 2nd place. But with the penalty, Max would be dumped down to 11th and Leclerc would inherit the pole position slot, ahead of Perez, Hamilton, Norris, Piastri, Russell, Sainz, Alonso, Ocon and Albon. Now this would be a time to suggest a rule where if you make it into the 3rd qualifying session and you know you have to take an engine penalty, you should be excluded from the 3rd qualifying session and the person in 11th moved up into 10th so that they can go into the knockout stage instead, or the final shootout stage. But then that idea falls apart because you need the person that's taking the grid penalty to set a time so you know where they're going to end up after the grid penalty. This was just a smooth brain attempt at seeing a Williams enter Q3, to be honest. But anyway, with Max behind Lando again, it was down to the McLaren driver to make a decent getaway, and Lando's starts let him down again. The guy can't make a decent getaway, it seems. He lost 3 positions. Around him, you also had Perez losing a spot to Hamilton at the start, but actually looked quite racy in trying to get it back on the way up to Les Combes, with the Red Bull driver ducking out into Eau Rouge to try and get the slipstream up the Camel Straight. Quite an action-packed start, all things considered, but Norris losing 3 places should be a concern for McLaren. Although, to be fair to Norris, he did grab the gravel on the outside of La Source rather than just simply bogging down off the line, but still, pressure and Norris don't really go together. Hamilton took the lead on lap 3 on the Camel Straight, with Leclerc not really trying to fight too hard. Must have known the move was getting done. But from there, Hamilton just managed the gap, not pushing too hard to build the gap and not really overdriving. It looked like a standard Sunday drive really, before his first pit stop came on lap 11 that was designed to undercut everybody else, much like the undercut was the way to go at Hungary. So I do need to do a proper video on undercutting and overcutting, but the difference between the two is simple. With an overcut, you stay out on your tyres longer so that by the time you come in for your stop, you have fresher tyres than those around you, which is useful at tracks where overtaking is incredibly easy, such as somewhere like Monza or anywhere else where setting up for the overtake is going to get you the overtake more often than not. It's also used at tracks where generating tyre temperature on the outlap is incredibly tricky, like at Monaco for instance, so the person pitting before you doesn't have the fresh tyre advantage straight away. This happened at the 2021 Monaco Grand Prix where Hamilton tried to pit before Gasly to jump him in the stops, but on his outlap he wasn't generating the tyre temperature and Gasly on his old tyres was doing a similar pace to the Mercedes which had the brand new ones, so it didn't work. Vettel stayed out even longer and jumped them both when he pitted. The undercut is the opposite. You pit early and you use the fresh tyre advantage in grip and lap time to set faster lap times than those around you on older tyres, so that by the time the other car or cars pit, your fresh tyre pace advantage has allowed you to overtake the other guy or guys when they're stationary. This tactic is often employed at tracks like Hungary and Singapore, where it's very difficult to overtake and the only way you're going to achieve a pass easily is by doing it on strategy. Yes, your rivals will have a tyre advantage when they come out of the pits, but because it's hard to get by at the track you're using it at, it doesn't really matter. Vettel used an undercut in the 2019 Singapore Grand Prix. He pitted from 3rd when he was behind Leclerc and Hamilton, and using the fresh tyres he could bang in a faster outlap than Hamilton and Leclerc could do on their in-lap, so that he had the race lead when the other two came out of the pits. He then went on to win the race. The only issue with the undercut is that you need to be in clean air when you exit the pits to maximise the outlap. If you catch lapped traffic or another car for position and the whole thing falls apart. I hope that's explained things, but I need to look at doing a more detailed video with some examples. So Hamilton, Piastri and Perez came in on lap 11. Russell came in one lap prior on lap 10. It seemed that an undercut was going to be the way to go. Because of the shorter DRS zone on the Camel, it was harder to overtake. And the undercut worked for Russell because he managed to jump Piastri in the stops, but was then overtaken into Les Combes. Once everything had cycled through, Hamilton had nearly a 5-second lead over Piastri and was looking semi-comfortable out there, while Russell had managed to leapfrog his way up to third by lap 26, leading Verstappen by about 2 seconds. Most had expected the race to be between the two McLarens and Verstappen, so seeing the two Mercedes that high up and one of them actually leading the race was quite a surprise, by 5 seconds as it so happens. But just before Hamilton pitted at the end of lap 26, Russell was on the radio to the pit wall saying, "We should try a one-stop here." Hamilton came in at the end of lap 26, was stationary for 2.4 seconds, and we saw what was quite possibly the most pointless camera trick in history. On the face of it, Russell was trying something incredibly weird. One-stoppers at Spa don't work, even with tyres like these. I can't recall anyone trying it before. I'm sure there's some anoraks that can recall it happening, but Google isn't returning any results beyond yesterday. Friday practice had shown incredibly high degradation on the tyres, so unless somebody just wanted to fall down the order later on in the race, then two-stopping was the optimal strategy. But as Russell pointed out after the race, as the race went on, the tyres were feeling good, and with nobody around, it was totally fine. Piastri was in the same boat too. When he was leading the race, his car was feeling fine as well. Every simulation, spreadsheet, calculation, whatever it is that they run on the pit wall and in the garage after every session showed that if he one-stopped or two-stopped, Russell was going to finish 5th. They could have potentially tried a 3-stopper to put him on super fresh, super fast tyres at the end and try and blitz a few positions back towards the end of the Grand Prix. But either way, 2-stop was the way to go. A 1-stop was a crazy suggestion. Everybody else, so Hamilton, Piastri, Norris, Verstappen, Perez, Leclerc and Sainz, all stopped twice. But somehow it appeared Russell was making all this work out in front and was holding Hamilton off, who had much fresher tyres. And Lewis was probably taking things a little easy in the closing stages to try and avoid an accident. Secure the 1-2, play the long game, all that good stuff. But at the same time, Norris had been close to overtaking Verstappen on a couple of occasions and not quite having the steam to get it done, so I don't know. Maybe that shorter DRS zone was holding people up a tiny bit. With about 10 laps to go, Piastri had gone round the outside of Leclerc at Les Combes in a brilliant move, and I'm quite excited for how well Piastri is going to do over the course of his career and the rest of the season. He's already won one race, maybe he can win a few more, without team orders this time. But as the race went on, the tyres started to drop off on George's car, and Hamilton was closing in at about half a second per lap. So what you end up with is the top 3 finishing pretty much nose to tail. Russell from Hamilton with Piastri just behind, which, if the simulations and data had gone the way anyone expected, it should have been a fight between Hamilton and Piastri in those final laps instead, and that would have been great to watch. But you had those 3, then a gap of about, 6-7 seconds or so, and then Leclerc, Verstappen and Norris coming in nose to tail. Then somewhere even further back was Perez in 8th, who had done nothing but go backwards. But about an hour and a half after the race had finished, Russell was disqualified. So let's try and explain all this away then. When Russell's car was weighed, it came in at 798 kilograms, which is bang on the minimum weight that the FIA has set. With no safety car and no rain, the weights were going to be marginal, but this is Formula 1 and this is all calculated to very fine margins, such is the nature of the sport. But when it went through again, the FIA had noted that not all the fuel had been taken out, and that the 798 kilogram minimum limit is the dry weight, so car and driver plus helmet and hands device with all the fuel taken out. Once all that fuel was taken out, the car was found to be 1.5 kilos underweight, which has pointed towards the tyres on George's car getting far too worn over the course of the Grand Prix, even though he'd still made this one-stop strategy work and held off Hamilton, who had 16-lap fresher tyres on. But still, to lose 1.5 kilos in weight on just the tyres, he would have to have burnt off 500 grams per tyre. While looking all this up, it might be due to how Spa has been resurfaced recently. The run from Stavelot to the exit of Les Combes has been resurfaced, and the tarmac was some sort of super grippy tarmacy stuff, but not like that automotive Velcro they used at Texas one year. Well, it was closer to sandpaper, wasn't it? Sector 2, which is Les Combes all the way through Rivage, No Name, Pouhon, Fagnes and up to Stavelot, was the old tarmac, and any tyre data used to predict the strategies and drop-off and all those other bits and pieces had been taken from Friday practice because Saturday it had been raining and it had washed all the rubber off. So when the track was green, that high grip tarmac was causing high degradation. As the track rubbered up over the weekend, that grip was still there, but the rubber deposited on the track allowed older tyres to maintain performance without degrading as much. So by just over the halfway point of the race, Russell was able to go, screw it, let's one stop. On top of this, you still had the older tarmac in Sector 2 that was going to provide tyre degradation similar to last year. So if I'm getting this right, the degradation at the start of the Grand Prix would have been pretty high, and then as the track rubbered in, that degradation then slows down while you still get the grip in sort of sectors 1 and 3. And that's how Russell was able to pull off the strategy he did, but it was his undoing. The reason for the car being underweight is pointing towards two things. Number one being that George burned too much fuel trying to stay ahead of Hamilton and just overcooked things. But this is impossible given all the fuel needs taking out to weigh the car because it's the dry weight of the car that's measured. So the logical explanation with no damage anywhere on that Mercedes is to think that with this super grippy tarmac taking too much rubber off the tyre. One thing to note about Spa as well is that it's the only track on the calendar where they don't do a full in-lap after the race is finished. Instead, they turn into the pit lane exit and then back up the pit lane to Parc Fermé to save time. So there's no chance of driving around to pick up the rubber, from the marbles. While all the other teams would have accounted for that, given that it happens every year and it never changes, there's the prospect of Mercedes being caught out by this new tarmac, the washout of Saturday, and then it just taking too much off as George went through the race. Would George have been able to add an average of 500 grams per tyre to the weight of his car by doing a full in-lap? Probably. I mean, I don't understand how it works. I don't even know how much weight they pick up from the marbles at the end of every race, but all the teams do it just in case, because, well, every little helps, as the saying goes. But either way, if you were to look at things between the checker flag dropping and that initial hour-ish after the race before George was disqualified, you'd look at what happened and go, bloody hell, he's played a blinder here. Because let's face it, Mercedes hasn't had a good time over the last 2 years. 1 win in 2022, none in 2023. Now they've got 3 wins this year. Would anyone have expected this after the season opener? Probably not. Russell's big brain call turned a potential 1-5 or a 2-5 into a 1-2 or a 2-3, which would have been a massive boost to the team in the Constructors. But that wasn't to be. Russell was disqualified for an incredibly black and white breach of the rules which offers no defence and no mitigating circumstances, at least in this specific instance. If he'd had a chunk of bodywork knocked off by another car, it might have helped his case. But he didn't, so he was disqualified, which knackered Mercedes' 1-2 celebrations, muted George's celebrations, and moved Lewis up 1 position to take his 105th Grand Prix victory. It breaks the record of 104 Grand Prix wins, which was set in the July of 2024 by Lewis Hamilton. Lewis had the pace, no denying. I mean, somehow, maybe it's because he's got a rocket ship of a car again, because, as we all know, Lewis can't win unless his car is far and away the best on the grid. But George, had he kept the win, would have won through a brilliant call about his tyres. One would have won through being the fastest, assuming Piastri doesn't fluff his stop and other factors, and the second would have won it through being a genius. As such, it wasn't. But the social media posts never disappoint. People saying that for once Mercedes sabotaged George, some saying that Lewis got the win he rightfully deserved, or words to that effect in the end. Comments written in Spanish saying that Checo was shafted, and on Max's Instagram posts and Horner's Instagram posts, there were people blaming Hannah and the rest of the pit wall for Max finishing in 5th, or later 4th, despite that absolutely mental lap in qualifying. Shut the f*** up. I mean, when you do this sort of thing, you have to read the absolute drivel that gets posted on the internet. I can't block these Twitter accounts fast enough, it seems, but I mean, how dim do you have to be to genuinely think that a driver is deliberately being shafted by one team? Sabotaged, the word that keeps getting used. But Mercedes isn't complaining. They've taken it on the chin, they know they messed up, and they're working out how to not have it happen again. In one case, their decision to let Russell stay out would have overridden the calculations they had for tyre wear in terms of the weight of the rubber. Hamilton pitted twice, so would have taken the tyres on shorter stints. George took 1 set for 34 laps, or something along those lines. But it has to be said that Alonso and Tsunoda also 1-stopped during the race, but came within the regulations. But Alonso pitted on lap 13 and Tsunoda on lap 15. Russell had come in at the end of lap 10 and might have taken too much out of the tyres at some point in that 34-lap period. Or it could have been the change to the floor, since they changed that after it wasn't giving them what they wanted on Friday. That might have contributed to the weight difference too. But I'm sure there's many meetings happening at Brackley today to figure it out, and they'll probably have an answer soon. But given how Mercedes looked in practice, salvaging this result seemed impossible. Maybe the car suits the track, maybe they found something over the course of the weekend, I don't know. But to win the race while everybody was expecting the McLarens and Verstappen to be the ones up there challenging for the 3 spots of the podium, well, where did that come from? So it's just a wait for Zandvoort now. The summer break is in full swing, so I'm sure we'll find something to do until then. So what do we do until then? But either way, rubbish rule or it is what it is? Let me know in the comments. So then, a look at the disqualification for George Russell at the 2024 Belgian Grand Prix. If this has been interesting for you, then do like the video so I know a good job was done, and for more like this, get subscribed with the bell on so you never miss out on anything else to do around here. Massive thanks as ever to the fine bunch of lads over at Patreon that continue to support me at a more personal level, and if you want to help keep things running around here, then a link to Patreon is in the description, along with links to Discord, socials, affiliates and other bits and bobs you might want or need to know. There's also super thanks if you want to buy me a coffee, or there's memberships if you don't want to do the whole Patreon thing, but still support in a Patreon style. So until next time, I've been Millward, have a great day wherever you are, and goodbye.